In a 6-3 decision, our far-right extremist Supreme Court voted to uphold Tennessee's discriminatory ban on gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth. Now, as bad as this is, I will say the silver lining is that it's not as bad as it could have been. As Dr. Jack Turbin explains, states that haven't passed bans can continue care. This doesn't impact them. For states that have bans, the laws can still be challenged in state court and blocked there. So not all hope is lost, and my worst fear was that the Supreme Court would issue a sweeping ruling that bans gender-affirming healthcare in all 50 states. That didn't happen, which is good. Having said that, their decision here does have broader implications for trans rights, generally speaking, since their ruling essentially greenlights anti-trans discrimination across the country for basically any conceivable reason. And I want to explain to you why this ruling does just that. So the Supreme Court rejected the idea that Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming healthcare was tantamount to discrimination on the basis of transgender status, which is absurd. And they also reject the notion that it's discrimination based on sex, which violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So the question is, if it's not discrimination, then what exactly is it? And they argue the law removes one set of diagnoses: gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and gender incongruence from the range of treatable conditions, Roberts wrote. So that's their argument. But quick question. Which class of people specifically is going to be diagnosed with any one of those conditions? Are any cis people going to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria? Of course not. We are talking about trans people, which is a class of people that's being denied life-saving and medically necessary treatment. That is definitionally discrimination, and I can assure you, the conservative majority, they're not dumb. They're just being purposefully obtuse because they think it's okay to discriminate against trans and non-binary people because they are hateful bigots, full stop. I don't know why we even have a constitution if the president completely disregards it and if the highest court now is going to disregard it and just make shit up as they go along. And because of the Supreme Court's decision here, this is going to have damaging repercussions for trans people, particularly in red states, but across the country. HuffPost explains, this decision allows states to more easily enact bans on care and could set a precedent for other challenges to laws barring transgender people from participating in sports, using bathrooms, and accessing healthcare. As for why this is the case, they continue, the court ruled that the law was permissible under rational basis review, a more lenient standard of legal review that considers whether government actions are rationally connected to a legitimate state interest. The plaintiffs in the case had argued that because the law dealt with sex-based classifications, it should be looked at under a higher level of review, strict scrutiny, which is applied when a fundamental constitutional right is in question. The court denied that claim. The plaintiffs argued that SB 1, this is Tennessee's bill, warrants heightened scrutiny because it relies on sex-based classifications, but neither of the above classifications turns on sex. Rather, SB 1 prohibits healthcare providers from administering puberty blockers or hormones to minors for certain medical uses, regardless of a minor's sex, Roberts wrote. Instead, Roberts concluded that questions regarding the regulation of treatments like puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors should be left to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process. Right, so this isn't about trans people as a class, per se. It's about certain types of medical treatment administered by doctors. But on the other hand, even though it's strictly a medical issue, we should leave it up to the democratic process. So if Texas voted to, say, ban chemotherapy or insulin shots or vaccines in favor of faith healing, it'd be acceptable to leave that up to the democratic process? I mean, by their logic, the answer would be yes. And I say that because, remember, this is the same court that let politicians decide what women can and can't do with their own fucking bodies. So I guess that they're fine with Big Brother weighing in on even more of our personal medical decisions. But the obvious question is, why should politicians and voters get to override the opinion of medical experts who say that gender-affirming healthcare is life-saving and medically necessary and effective? Well, Justice Clarence Thomas actually has an answer for that. He says, quote, "This case carries a simple lesson. In politically contentious debates over matters shrouded in scientific uncertainty, courts should not assume that self-described experts are correct." Now, to be clear, we're not talking about self-described experts. We're talking about experts, people who practice modern medicine, licensed physicians and pediatricians. And there is no scientific uncertainty here. Gender-affirming healthcare is the standard of care recommended by the experts for individuals with gender dysphoria. It works. It's effective. It is life-saving. Every major medical organization agrees. And in the same way that big tobacco downplayed the dangers of smoking and big oil lied about the reality of anthropogenic climate change, you have politically motivated people here trying to make it seem as though there's no scientific consensus, when in fact that's not the case. There is. And Clarence Thomas is aware of this. He's just lying on purpose. But in spite of him not wanting to take into account the opinion of experts, what's ironic is that he's in the majority opinion, which cites medical misinformation pushed by the right so-called experts. I'm not making this up. As Jack Turbin points out, the SCOTUS majority decision in Skrmetti contains frank misinformation. No such evidence exists here. And he points to a sentence in the majority opinion that reads, discordance between sex and gender can be resolved through less invasive approaches. First of all, according to whom? And second of all, like what? Conversion therapy? Prayer? I mean, gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth already is not invasive. When we're talking about adolescence, prepubescent adolescence, it's just social transition, letting them wear the clothes they want to wear, letting them use the pronouns that they prefer to use. That's all it is. If that's invasive to you, then I don't know what to say. But you see, they don't care about the overwhelming majority of medical experts, but the couple of so-called experts who are being funded by religious organizations, well, their expertise, it actually does matter. So in a way, they do care about experts, just the experts that will confirm their pre-existing anti-trans biases. And Dr. Turbin's opinion here is important because he actually is one of the experts they're poo-pooing. He conducted one of the, if not the largest studies on gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth and confirmed again that it is effective, life-saving, and medically necessary. But again, we're not dealing with honest actors here. We're dealing with politically motivated hacks who deny common sense. As Justice Sotomayor put it in her dissenting opinion, the court today renders transgender Americans doubly vulnerable to state-sanctioned discrimination. She also argues that the decision does irrevocable damage to the Equal Protection Clause and invites legislatures to engage in discrimination by hiding blatant sex classification in plain sight. She's absolutely right, and the outcome of this decision here is further proof that this institution has completely failed us. It failed us in a multitude of ways, but they're supposed to objectively interpret the Constitution. But they're not doing that. They are applying flimsy legal justifications to their pre-existing anti-trans biases, and that's how they're making these decisions. It's one of many decisions that they've made, not based on what the Constitution says, but based on what they feel should happen. And Sotomayor is correct to point out that this is leading to the destruction of the Constitution, because if you're not going to be objective and interpret it in the way that it's supposed to be interpreted, then it doesn't have any meaning. It's just useless, right? It's just a recommendation as opposed to requirements. And now states are going to feel even more emboldened to discriminate against trans people, and this could open the door to all kinds of discriminatory policies, as the HuffPost article explained. But it could presumably even include bans on gender-affirming healthcare for adults, because they don't think that trans people are a class. They think that it's just like a medical decision that should be left up to democracy. So if states wanted to ban all people from transitioning, some are already trying to do that, then apparently that's just okay, to deny people basic human rights, to try to wipe trans people out of existence. And it's like, I say that this is going to embolden states, but it's not like they felt restrained before, because the same state that passed this law that the Supreme Court adjudicated on today also passed the law letting doctors discriminate against LGBTQ plus people if their existence offends them, which is just fucking absurd. And this is one of nearly 600 anti-LGBTQ plus laws introduced in 2025 alone. And at the federal level, the Department of Homeland Security eliminated a rule that prohibits them from spying on citizens solely on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity, meaning that the Trump administration could feasibly conduct surveillance on LGBTQ plus groups. So if he says gender-affirming healthcare is bad, and you have a particular LGBTQ organization saying that gender-affirming healthcare is life-saving and medically necessary, he can surveil them now. He's allowed to do that. It doesn't matter that it's against the Constitution. He's able to do that because anything goes. Now, on top of that, the FBI opened up a literal snitch line so that way you can turn in parents or doctors who offer medically necessary and life-saving healthcare to trans youth. And they're doing this under the guise of protecting children. But as the first two replies to that tweet pointed out, they're not doing shit about school shooters, and they haven't arrested a single child sex trafficker tied to Jeffrey Epstein. And we know that they won't do that because, you know, if they pursue those leads, it's going to lead back to Donald Trump, who himself is implicated with Jeffrey Epstein's scandal. But I do want to leave you with a little bit of good news, since this story has been extremely depressing. As Politico reports, U.S. District Judge Julia Kobach blocked Trump's executive order banning trans and non-binary gender markers on passports, and journalist Aaron Reed is calling this a huge win, since the judge also granted class certification to trans and non-binary people as well. And this goes into effect right away. Although I will say that trans advocates don't seem sure about whether or not it's safe to apply for passports yet, since you might not get it back if you send it in, or send in your information like your birth certificate and whatnot. And this administration has been known to not comply with court orders, so I genuinely don't know if it's a good idea to try to update your passport in this moment. But on top of that, the Supreme Court, they could reverse this. They could erase the class certification that Judge Kobach granted to trans people. But with that being said, Aaron Reed is calling this one of the biggest victories for trans people since Trump took office a second time. So in a climate like this, I'm going to celebrate the wins, even if they're small wins, because we don't get them that often. But still, having said that, having to fight for basic human rights in 2025 is exhausting and demoralizing, and I understand that. But I think that we are going to win one day, regardless of all of this that's happening. But our victory hinges on us not checking out when we see this bad news. It's going to require us to not back down ever. And history has shown us that even though things are bad right now, they can change really quickly. I mean, in 2004, Bush was campaigning on a constitutional amendment to ban marriage equality, but by 2015, we had marriage equality in all 50 states. So the takeaway is that win or lose, we always have to fight for basic human rights in perpetuity, because that's the way that it is. The other side will never relent, and because of that, we can never relent as well. Never get too comfortable. You're always going to have to defend what we accomplished, and even though we're taking steps back, we will move forward and ultimately win one day, but that win is not going to be guaranteed forever. So we will always have to fight, and you've got to keep that in mind.
Mom, I'm gay.
Gays. Gays.
Mom, I'm transgender.